everyone, Oli here. Welcome to my review of part 5 to 8 of Trail of a Time Lord, which is entitled Mindwarp. The second story of the 23rd season classic Doctor Who, starring Colin Baker as the Sixth Doctor. Mindwarp is 145th story overall, it's 4 parts long, and it's written by Philip Martin. So the plot is as follows. The Valiant's prosecution continues as he presents damning evidence of the Doctor's interference on the planet Florus Beta. Dangerous experiments are being carried out there that could affect the future of all life, and they must be stopped. But why is the Doctor so determined to help his former enemy, the greedy, opportunistic Syl? And why has he turned against his companion Perry? One thing is certain, someone will die. So that is the plot of Mindwarp. So in my opinion, I think Mindwarp, I don't think is a good story. It's a big mess, and not as messy as other stories, but I think Mindwarp is just as messy. The production was alright. I like the trippy effects the surroundings of Solar Speeder with the trippy planet at the background, with the, I think it was a purple sea and it's a green sky with the planet outline and the purple, pinkish purple scene as seen here. And this is where the TARDIS had landed on Solar Beta. It was nice that some effort has been made for some of the stories, especially the productions of this especially with the CGI making now, so yeah. The sets were okay. Most of it were just caves and where Kev and Syl and everyone else was, and the script was okay, and the direction by Ron Jones was not as good. The plot did seem good on paper, but once again, the execution really did not do the story any favors at all. And it was a very confusing plot because most of the time I didn't really have an idea of what was going on. But I had somewhat of an idea, but I think it was a bit confusing, a bit of a mess at times, and even when the season ended, I think kind of did make sense. But then overall, I think it was just a very confusing story. Even Colin Baker, that he himself had no idea of what was going on. He actually tried to ask Eric Saywood about what was going on, and he couldn't really give a straight answer. And also, to make things even worse, the director, Ron Jones, and Philip Martin, who actually wrote the story, had no idea as well, because Eric Saywood had actually resigned as the script editor at this point, and he was the only one who could actually make reason of this, but then he himself didn't really have any idea what was going on as well. So I think because of Saywood resigning, I think from a production point of view, I think the plots were just very scattered and just into disarray. Mindwarp is a mini follow-up of Vengeance on Varos, as we see Syl returning. He's obviously not happy with the Doctor interfering in Varos. The plot was quite dark. It was very much like a season 22 story, complete with violence with a very high death count and whatnot. But this was done on purpose by the Valiant, which was good, but it did seem as if the story was falling back into the trap as to what really ruined the 22nd season back in 1985. And of course, Mindwarp is the second installment of Trial of a Time Lord. And here, this is where things start to heat up a bit. And it's explained here that the Doctor's visit to Florus Beta was actually his most recent, and before the time it decided to summon him to the space station. And the Valar wants to show how dastardly travelling with the Doctor was, so he uses this adventure. Although the Valar actually does temper with things here, so she makes to show the Doctor at his absolute worst, and at the end of the story, it seems that the odds are firmly stacked against the Doctor, which was shown in the evidence, because the Doctor was pretty much affected by Cruise's experiments, which was causing him to work with Syl, which pretty much turned the Doctor back into his old rude self, which turned the Doctor made the Doctor reckless and more careless, in which Perry actually called him out on. And then Perry gets experimented on, and that's how she dies in this story, because her body was very much used as a vessel for Kiv's brain, and then suddenly the doctor who pretty much snaps out of it with Kronos, tries to run in and save her, but then the Doctor is pretty much recalled back into the TARDIS, and that's how he's pulled back into the TARDIS, and then now that's how the TARDIS ends up in the space station, and Kronos trying to make it into the room to try and save Perry, but he's slowed down by the Time Lords, just like the War Games. And that's when Kronos saw Perry in this state, and that's how he just kills everyone in the room. And the Valar pretty much makes it out as if the Doctor had abandoned her and had no choice but to let Perry die. terms of good moments, a good part of it was rather forgettable, with the exception of some of the courtroom scenes, especially with the Doctor. And this is probably one of the most important parts in this story, when the Doctor is shown Perry's death, and I found that scene very memorable. And this is when he realizes that the time was let Perry die, and the Doctor just says, "You killed Perry," and Colin Baker's delivery of that line was just very heartbreaking. Aside from that, really did enjoy Kronos for most part. He's played by Brian Blessed, who's a very well-known British actor who's very known for his very theatrical, very hammy, loud acting. He's very much known for chewing the scenery at any chance he gets. So onto the performances, and Lord, it was a hamfest for everyone involved. It was fun at first, but then having everyone trying to be a bit overcompensatory for the sake of the plot was a bit iffy. Colin Baker was really good here, even though the Doctor was trying his damned hardest to convince the court that what the Violet was showing was untrue, and then the evidence shown as if the Doctor had gone 360 in his development and started being like his old self. Well, this was because of Cruzier when he used the helmet to try and interrogate him, and that's what caused the Doctor to act like his old self, often supervised with the mentors. But we, the viewers, don't actually know if this is legit or not. So the Doctor in the courtroom can't remember what actually happened, which allows the Valiant to manipulate things in his favour. And this is quite interesting, as we see the Silk Doctor at his most vulnerable, because he has no memory of what happened to Florence Beaton, and the only thing he can rely on is the Valiant's evidence, which has pretty much been tampered with. And it was a downright tragedy. And the time was actually recorded Doctor at that point, as he was about to save Perry, and then that's how he sees Perry's death in the courtroom, and it actually stuns him. The Doctor's able to snap out of the confusion, and the Valiant trying to gaslight him. And that's how he realizes something is going on and intends to find out. I did like how he was mocking the Valiant for pretty much blowing smoke up the Inquisitor's arse by calling her sagacity, which she was actually liking. And I must say, the humour between the Sixth Doctor and the Valiant was quite funny and quite good, even here as well. Nicola Bryant was good as well, and this is unfortunately her final story as Perry dies at the end. After the Doctor goes back towards his own way, she's pretty much left on her own whilst trying to see if anything could be done to help the Doctor, but she's with King Kronos for most of the story, and I do think Bryant and Blessed actually do have some decent chemistry together, and I really like the scene where when Kronos is asking Perry where she was coming from, and she responds to Earth, and then he says he doesn't have any idea of the place, and then she said he'd like it there because you have madmen playing at warriors and playing over the top in politics, and he asks what is politics, and she says it's yakety yak talk, because politics is pretty much yakety yak. And that's definitely my favourite Perry quote from her entire time in the TARDIS. So I do wish we got to see more of Perry being quite sassy, not just from time to time, not just toward the Doctor. And I do think Nicola Bryant does have some very hammy, even Bryant was quite hammy herself, even when she was possessed, even though not possessed, even when Kiev was in her body, she was acting very evil in a very pantomimish way, and that was quite impressive as well, and that just goes to show that she can do Nicola Bryant can do some hammy acting, and that was quite fun to see. Linda Bellingham and Michael Jaston were good here, especially Jaston, as we really see how ruthless the Valiant is. Now, I did like how the Inquisitor was pretty much liking how the Valiant was literally butting her up, calling her your sagacity and all that. And obviously with the Valiant, you see more of his intentions coming out, and he definitely seems very hell bent on proving the Doctor's guilt, and he even manages to briefly gaslight the Doctor into thinking that what happened in Florence Beta actually happened because the Doctor had no memory of it, what happened whatsoever. And the Doctor catches on to this and vows to find out what's going on. On to the notable side cast, and I found them, aside from Kronos, quite weak. So first off, we have King Kronos. He's a warlord warrior king from Thorndon. He was captured, and Cruzier wanted to alter his mind for the financial benefit of the Mentors. He wanted to rebel against the Mentors as well, and he meets Perry and falls in love with her, and does try and save her from having Kiv's mind transferred to her body. But because the Time Lord's interfering, he's too late and ends up killing everyone in the room, including Perry. King Kronos is a great character, and truth be told, if They hadn't cast Brian Blessed as Uchronos. I think this story would have gone more sideways than it already has. And then you have Cruiser. He was a scientist that was brought onto Thoros Beta to, and he specialized in perfecting the control and alteration of his behavior, and he needed the funding for his work, and for this that's how he was brought onto Thoros Beta. So if he was able to save Kiev and transfer his brain into someone else, that's how he would get his money. He was the cause of the Doctor's personality change, and he was killed by Kronos when he saw Perry in the Mind of Kiev. And then we have Matrona Karni. She was a senior servant of Kiev and was Cruiser's assistant. She was also in charge of the female servant and also recruits Perry into her household and allows her to serve without being processed. And she was the one who pretty much prepped Perry for her body to be used by Kiev, but she was killed by Kronos also. And then we have Dorf. He was a warrior and a companion of Kronos, and he was experimented on by Cruiser, and that's how he became like a wolf sort of character. And then he tried to attack the Doctor and Perry when they landed on the planet, but then he was killed by a god. And then we had Tuza. He aided Kronos in the rebellion. So the villains of the story have Civ and Kiev. Civ obviously returning from vengeance on Varos, and Thoros Beta is his home planet, and he's now an arms dealer, and he's very much working with the primitive Krontas. I think that's where your Kronos is also. He's still very prejudiced against humans and still loves to see them suffer, but at the same time, he wanted his master Kiev to find a new body. Civ still was good here, but he's also a bit annoying, and I think his appearance of Vengeance of Varos is a bit better, and I think he also died when Kronos saw Perry's body. And then we have Kiev. Kiev was the leader of the Mentors and Civ's superior. Kiev was a very intelligent human being due to his brain getting mutilated, so he had all this knowledge and all that. So his brain was getting larger and larger, and it was slowly killing him. So he wanted his brain transferred to another body so his mind can survive. So that's how he hired Cruiser. Eventually, his brain was transferred to Perry's body, and this didn't last long, because he was in Perry's body was killed by Kronos. He was a bit dull, good motive, good villain, good motive, but I found him rather dull. So on to the fault of the story. I think due to the ambiguous situation of if the story had actually happened or not, or the Doctor was actually evil or not, it was a very, very confusing to follow, which caused the plot execution to become very scattered, and the story itself, outside the courtroom scenes, were very uninteresting. The plots really drag, especially in part 1 or part 5 in this story. In this case, the Perry effect is back, and it's even worse here, and it even led to her death, and it was very hastily written and done away to create some form of shock factor, and then in the end of the season it changes all that, but yeah, it doesn't really change much of that, and obviously part 2 or part 6's cliffhanger was quite redundant as well, and the Doctor was to be killed in the evidence, and he was in the courtroom, but he was killed in the evidence, but clearly the Doctor's alright because he's in the trial. So this is Nicola Bryant's last story as Perry Brown. She becomes the fourth companion to die when she's experimented on, and she has her body used by Kiv's. Her body is used by Kiv, for his mind, and then if it's successful, but then then she's killed by Kronos when he tries to save her, but then because the Time Lord's interfering, he was too late, and then he was very shocked at what happened, so he pretty much has to kill everyone in just in agony. Perry is a great companion. Though she spent most of her time arguing with the Doctor and getting put through hell during her travels, it was a very terrible way for her to go, story-wise and writing-wise. But John Nathan Turner kind of somehow made things a bit worse at the end of the season when it's disregarded. But I'll explain what it is later. So, but those who are familiar with what happened will pretty much guess what happened. But I won't say it here just for the sake of it. But John Nathan Turner tries to fix it in a way which is successful, but at the same time it just feels very just feels like a very quick fix just to reverse what happened. Just to reverse what happened. So to conclude, Mindwarp was very confusing as a plot. There was some good ideas, but creative-wise, it needed a lot of fine-tuning, and Eric Saywers actually left, and even the production was just helter-skelter, and it was felt majorly in the last two stories, and I think it would have been better if this story was actually told in another season, or at least if the orders were changed. I think it would have been done slightly better. But I think I do like how it adds overall to the overall plot of the Trial of the Time Lord, but as a standalone story, it doesn't really work and it doesn't really pass for me. So Mindwarp gets a 4.5 out of 10. My next review will be parts 9 to 12 of Trial of the Time Lord, and it's called Terror of the Vervoids. The plot is starting to heat up, and we see a new companion called Melanie Bush. Thanks for watching the story. Please leave a comment on what you think of this story and this review. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Until then, see you later.